Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, let's start our video. Daniel Reyes lived in a cramped, dimly lit apartment in a worn-down working-class neighborhood where the walls seemed to absorb the constant hum of traffic outside. It was still dark when he rose each morning, the cold floor biting at his bare feet as he moved quietly to avoid waking his daughter. In the kitchen, under the weak glow of a flickering bulb, he stood at the ironing board, pressing the creases from a faded shirt that had seen far too many workdays. At the small table nearby, his 10-year-old daughter Sophia sat hunched over her homework, her head tilted, lips moving silently as she solved math problems. The two shared a silent rhythm born from years of early mornings and late nights, a quiet partnership against life's relentless grind. Daniel's hands, though steady, carried the weight of exhaustion. He had once been a brilliant student at a prestigious university, fluent in several languages, with dreams of becoming a world-class interpreter. But those dreams had been cut short when tragedy struck. His wife's sudden illness and death left him with a newborn to raise alone. The life of research and opportunity was replaced by survival, and he took a modest job as a translator for a small shipping company, a position that barely covered rent and bills. Yet in every glance toward Sophia, there was a flicker of pride and unwavering determination. Every pressed shirt, every early morning, and every late night was a promise, unspoken but unbreakable, that he would do whatever it took to give her a better life, no matter how much the world seemed to push back. The call came just after lunch, pulling Daniel away from his desk and into his boss's office. The atmosphere there was different, tense, expectant, and his boss wasted no time getting to the point. An urgent freelance opportunity had landed in their lap, something far beyond the company's usual routine work. A high-profile client needed a translation done immediately. And not just any client, a billionaire, the kind whose name was whispered in boardrooms and splashed across business magazines. Alexander Kane. Kane's reputation was larger than life. A man of vision and precision, brilliant enough to turn entire industries in his favor, ruthless enough to leave rivals in ruin, and intimidating enough that people often stumbled over their words in his presence. He was orchestrating an international merger worth billions, and in the middle of it all was a rare, ancient business document written in multiple obscure languages, something so specialized that only a handful of people in the world could even attempt to decode it. Daniel was ushered into a sleek conference room where Kane himself sat at the far end of the table, his tailored suit sharp, his expression unreadable. Without pleasantries, Kane slid the document across the table. "I'll double your pay if you can translate this in 24 hours and get every detail correct," he said, his voice steady but carrying a quiet challenge, as if daring Daniel to refuse. In that moment, Daniel's mind was a storm. The amount Kane was offering could cover Sophia's much-needed dental surgery and clear the stack of overdue rent notices sitting on the kitchen counter. It was a lifeline, but also a risk, a test where failure could cost him more than just money. He met Kane's eyes and felt the weight of the challenge pressing in. This wasn't just a job. This was a turning point. Daniel sat alone in the conference room after Kane left, the document open before him like a riddle carved by centuries. His eyes scanned the faded lines of text, and the more he read, the more the weight in his chest grew. This wasn't a simple translation. The passages shifted between three obscure dialects, each with its own set of archaic idioms and symbols, languages so rare that even experts hesitated before tackling them. He knew the stakes. If he succeeded, the money would change everything for him and Sophia. But if he failed, Kane's world was built on precision. A mistranslation in a deal of this magnitude could have consequences worth millions, and Daniel's career, fragile as it was, would be shattered. Worse, word would spread, and he'd never get serious work again. That night, sitting across from Sophia at their kitchen table, he watched her trying to hide the discomfort in her jaw as she worked through her homework. Her dental pain was getting worse, and the surgery they couldn't afford lingered at the edge of every decision he made. She glanced up at him and smiled, trusting, without question, that he could fix whatever needed fixing. That look made his hesitation feel like betrayal. The next morning, Daniel walked into Kane's office and gave his answer. "I'll do it." Kane's lips curved into a smirk, the kind that wasn't entirely about victory. It was the look of a man who had set a trap not just for skill, but for character, one that Daniel had just stepped into without realizing how deep it went. Daniel transformed their cramped kitchen into what he half-jokingly called a translation war room. The table was cleared of everything except a neat stack of dictionaries, an aging laptop, and a scattering of printouts. He pinned sheets of paper with handwritten notes to the wall, each one a puzzle piece in an intricate web of words. The smell of strong coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of dust from the old reference books he had pulled out of storage. He worked methodically, cross-referencing each unfamiliar phrase with digital archives and ancient linguistic databases. Occasionally, he reached out to a few trusted contacts from his university days, professors and fellow linguists who remembered him as the bright, promising student who could see patterns in language others missed. Each conversation reminded him of the life he had almost lived, the academic career that had been stripped away when tragedy forced him into survival mode. As the hours slipped by, Sophia appeared at his side with small offerings, a chipped mug of tea, a plate with biscuits, a reassuring smile. She asked questions about the strange symbols and tried to help by sorting his printed notes into neat stacks. Her presence grounded him, turning the solitary grind into a shared mission. Late into the night, the soft scratching of his pen and the gentle clink of her teacup became the soundtrack of their determination. Every word he deciphered felt like one step closer to a future where early mornings and overdue bills no longer ruled their lives. Yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, Daniel sensed this task was leading him toward something much larger than a payday. Daniel's progress slowed the moment his eyes caught a series of markings embedded between the lines of text, tiny, almost decorative symbols that didn't match any known punctuation or formatting style. At first, he thought they were ornamental flourishes from the documents. Original scribe, but the more he examined them, the more deliberate they seemed. They repeated at irregular intervals, sometimes replacing words entirely. They weren't part of any standard linguistic record he knew. His instincts told him these marks were more than aesthetic, they were a code. The challenge shifted from translation to decryption, and that was a far riskier game. If Kane wanted this done in 24 hours, he either didn't know about these symbols, or he knew exactly what they meant, and was testing Daniel's ability to uncover them. Unsure how deep the rabbit hole went, Daniel reached out to one of the few people he trusted with such a discovery, Dr. Mei Ling, a former classmate turned expert in ancient trade scripts. She answered his late-night call with surprise, but agreed to look at high-resolution scans he sent. It didn't take her long to respond, her tone low and urgent. "Be careful, Daniel," she said, her voice cutting through the static of the line. "These aren't just decorative symbols. They're part of an encrypted ledger system used centuries ago for secret trade agreements between rival factions. If this is tied to Kane's merger, it's not just about business. It's part of a powerful corporate secret, one that some people would go to great lengths to protect." Her warning lingered in his mind long after the call ended. The translation had just turned into something far more dangerous than he'd signed up for. The phone rang just after midnight, slicing through the quiet hum of Daniel's desk lamp. He glanced at the screen and felt a chill run through him. Alexander Kane. He answered cautiously, and Kane's voice came through smooth but edged with impatience. "Time is ticking, Mr. Reyes. You're either the best, or you're nothing." The words carried no anger, just an icy certainty, as if failure wasn't a possibility, but a personal flaw. Daniel assured him he was making progress, though he didn't mention the hidden symbols or Mei Ling's warning. Kane's tone softened slightly, but not in a way that put Daniel at ease. Instead of asking about the document, Kane began steering the conversation toward Daniel himself, where he lived, how long he'd been working at the shipping company, even how old his daughter was. There was a deliberate calm in the way Kane asked, each question carefully wrapped in casual phrasing, but it felt far from casual. Daniel could almost hear the weight of calculation behind the man's voice, as though he were mapping out Daniel's life in his mind. When the call ended, Daniel sat in the dark for a long moment, the phone still warm in his hand. Why him? Kane could have hired any top-tier linguist in the world for this job. Yet, for some reason, the billionaire had sought out a man scraping by in a small apartment with an outdated laptop. The more Daniel thought about it, the less this felt like luck, and the more it felt like a setup. By the next evening, the steady rhythm of Daniel's work was shattered. Sophia came home from school flushed and shivering, her small frame trembling under her jacket. A quick touch to her forehead confirmed it. Her fever was climbing fast. Within the hour, he was rushing her to the nearest hospital, the document file still open on his laptop back home. The waiting room's hard plastic chairs felt like stone beneath him as he balanced the weight of two worlds, the medical forms in his lap and the ancient text waiting to be unraveled. Each hour he spent by Sophia's bedside was an hour stolen from the ticking clock Kane had set. He tried working on his laptop there, but between the soft beeping of monitors and Sophia's restless murmurs, concentration was a battle he kept losing. When they finally returned home with a prescription and strict rest orders, a new blow waited at the door, a folded eviction notice tucked into the frame. The landlord had lost patience with the overdue rent, and the deadline for payment was now brutally close. Sitting at the kitchen table with the paper in one hand and his wife's old coffee mug in the other, Daniel felt the walls closing in. The job was already pushing him beyond his limits, and now Sophia's health and their home were on the line. The thought of quitting crept in, walking away before he collapsed under the weight of it all. But in the silence, he heard her voice, faint yet unshakable in his memory. "Don't ever let Sophia see you quit." His wife's final words weren't a request. They were a vow he had carried for a decade. With a long, steady breath, he pushed the eviction notice aside, opened his laptop, and went back to work. Quitting was no longer an option. It happened in the small hours of the morning, when the rest of the world was silent, and the only sounds in Daniel's apartment were the soft rustle of paper and the quiet tapping of his keyboard. His eyes burned from hours of staring at text, but then something shifted. A pattern emerged in the strange symbols, faint but undeniable. Piece by piece, he began aligning them with corresponding phrases in the primary languages. What at first had seemed decorative revealed itself as a substitution cipher, the kind used centuries ago to mask the most sensitive trade dealings. The more he decoded, the clearer the hidden message became. By dawn, the first layer of the code was laid bare before him. It wasn't a simple set of business terms. It was a confidential treaty between Kane's corporation and a powerful international conglomerate. The clauses were ruthless in their precision. Hidden penalties, aggressive takeover conditions, and strategic loopholes designed to strip Kane's rivals of influence and assets almost overnight. Daniel sat back, the enormity of it settling in. This document wasn't just a piece of history. It was a loaded weapon. Whoever controlled it could shape the outcome of a corporate war worth billions. His pulse quickened as the realization struck. Kane hadn't hired him for a mere translation. He'd been handed the keys to a conflict raging in the highest echelons of power. And somewhere, behind the polished smile and measured words, Alexander Kane was planning to use this document as a blade. And Daniel was the one sharpening it. Daniel wasn't expecting a knock on his door that morning, least of all from Alexander Kane himself. The billionaire stood in the narrow hallway outside the apartment, an incongruous figure in a tailored suit against peeling paint and worn carpeting. His presence filled the space, as though even the air knew to get out of his way. Kane stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze briefly sweeping over the cramped kitchen and the translation notes covering every surface. He didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, he pulled a slim leather folder from his briefcase and set it on the table between them. "Triple your pay," Kane said evenly, "if you agree not to share this translation with anyone ever." Daniel stared at him, the weight of the offer pressing down. The number Kane mentioned was life-changing, enough to pay off every debt, secure Sophia's surgery, move them into a better neighborhood, maybe even fund the future he'd once dreamed of. But there was a shadow under the offer, one that reeked of secrecy and control. As Kane spoke, Daniel realized the power had shifted, however slightly. The document in his possession wasn't just valuable to Kane. It was dangerous in the wrong hands. And right now, Daniel was the only one who knew what it said in full. A quiet war raged inside him. Taking the deal could mean safety and stability for Sophia, a chance to finally stop living from crisis to crisis. But it would also mean turning a blind eye to a plan designed to crush competitors through ruthless tactics. Kane's eyes were steady, but there was something else there too. A flicker that made Daniel wonder if this was another test, not just of his skill, but of the kind of man he was. And Daniel knew that whichever choice he made, it would define far more than the rest of this job. The call from May came just after sunset, her voice tight and low. "Daniel, someone's been watching me," she whispered. "Two men in suits, the same ones I saw outside my office yesterday. I don't know who they are, but they're not from a university. Be careful. This isn't just about Kane anymore." Before he could respond, the line went dead. A sharp knot twisted in his stomach. He knew May wouldn't overreact without reason, and if she was in danger because she'd helped him, that danger could easily find its way to his own doorstep. That night it did. Daniel returned from a pharmacy with medicine for Sophia to find the door to their apartment slightly ajar. The lock had been forced. His heart pounded as he stepped inside. Papers were scattered across the floor, desk drawers pulled out, and the walls stripped bare of the notes he'd pinned there. Whoever had been inside wasn't looking for money or valuables. They wanted the translation. A crash from the back room jolted him into action. He found Sophia clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with fear. He pulled her close, forcing calm into his voice even as adrenaline roared through him. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going next door for a bit." He hurried her across the hall to Mrs. Alvarez, their elderly neighbor, who had always been kind to Sophia. "Please, keep her inside," he told her quietly, "and don't open the door for anyone but me." The woman nodded, sensing enough to know not to ask questions. Back in his ransacked apartment, Daniel stood amid the wreckage. The message was clear. Someone wanted what he had, and they were willing to come into his home to get it. Whatever this job had started as, it had now become a fight for more than just survival. It was a fight to protect the one person he couldn't afford to lose. Daniel locked the door behind him, shoved a chair under the handle for good measure, and sat down at the cluttered kitchen table. Every muscle in his body ached. His eyes stung from lack of sleep, and the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with every passing second. Less than 8 hours remained. He forced himself into focus, channeling the panic and fear into raw determination. Page by page, line by line, he dug deeper into the document, tracing each obscure symbol and cross-referencing it against every resource he had left. The translation wasn't just words now. It was a battlefield, and he was fighting through it with nothing but persistence and love for his daughter driving him forward. Somewhere near dawn, his pen froze in midair. A phrase hidden in the deepest layer of the code stood out, a legal confirmation bearing Kane's name. But as Daniel compared it to other verified samples of Kane's signature from public records, his stomach dropped. The strokes were wrong. The subtle flourishes were missing. This wasn't Kane's hand. It was a forgery. The implication was staggering. Someone inside Kane's own empire had crafted this document not to serve him, but to destroy him. The clauses Daniel had thought were weapons for Kane might actually be traps to implicate him in illegal dealings. The entire picture shifted in his mind. Kane's midnight calls, his strange questions about Daniel's life, even the smirk the day they'd met. It wasn't arrogance. It was scrutiny. The billionaire hadn't just been hiring a translator. He'd been searching for someone honest, someone sharp enough to dig past the surface and find the truth buried underneath the lies. Daniel glanced at the clock. Hours were slipping away, but the translation was no longer just a job. It was the key to exposing whoever had set Kane up. And if he could finish it in time, he might just save them both. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an ascent into another world. Polished steel, soft leather, and a silence so heavy it pressed against Daniel's chest. When the door slid open, Kane's penthouse office came into view. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilling morning light across sleek marble floors, a city skyline stretching endlessly behind him. Kane stood at the far end, hands clasped behind his back, as though he'd been expecting Daniel all along. Daniel crossed the room, the completed translation tucked under his arm. He was ready for resistance, maybe even hostility. After all, the document revealed a conspiracy that could shake the foundation of Kane's empire. But when he set the folder on Kane's desk and met his eyes, the billionaire's expression didn't harden. It softened into something Daniel hadn't seen before. "You passed," Kane said simply, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. Daniel frowned. "Passed what exactly?" Kane stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "I needed someone with more than just linguistic skill. Someone who could see past the ink and the lies. Someone with integrity, who wouldn't sell the truth to the highest bidder. I've been trying to root out corruption in my own company for months. You just uncovered the final piece I needed." The weight of the words settled between them. Kane wasn't the villain Daniel had feared, at least, not in this case. He was a man at war with enemies inside his own walls. Daniel slid the full, accurate translation across the desk. "Everything's in there. Every clause, every hidden message, and every forgery." Kane's eyes flicked to the folder, but Daniel didn't miss the quick, knowing glance toward him, as if the man understood there was a backup copy somewhere safe. Daniel wasn't naive enough to hand over the only proof he had. Trust was earned, not given freely, even now. Kane nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of Daniel's caution. "Good," he said. "That's exactly why I chose you." The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a life Daniel had only ever imagined. Kane kept his word, offering him a permanent position as chief translation and cultural liaison, a role that came with a salary large enough to erase every debt and open doors he'd thought were forever closed. It wasn't just a job. It was a validation of every late night, every sacrifice, every moment he'd refused to quit. Sophia's dental surgery was scheduled immediately, and Daniel stayed by her side through the entire recovery. Watching her smile, without pain for the first time in months, was worth more than any paycheck. They found a new apartment in a safe neighborhood, with big windows and enough space for Sophia to have her own desk for homework. The air in their home felt lighter, freer, as if the walls themselves knew they were no longer under siege. On a crisp Monday morning, Daniel stood outside their new home in a clean, tailored suit, a polished briefcase in hand. Sophia, wearing her favorite scarf, skipped alongside him as they walked to the car. When they reached her school, she turned, grinning, and gave him a quick hug before running toward the gates. He watched her go, the early sunlight catching in her hair, and felt a quiet pride swell in his chest. In the stillness that followed, a thought rose clear and steady in his mind, one he knew he'd carry for the rest of his life. Sometimes the hardest tests aren't about what you know, but who you choose to be when it matters. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel, American Latest Stories.